Have you ever stood on the bank of a river, doing exactly what your grandfather taught you, and still caught absolutely nothing? You are casting downstream, letting the bait drift naturally, waiting for that massive bite, but your rod tip stays dead. What if I told you that your perfectly logical, deeply ingrained fishing habit is exactly what is scaring the fish away? Today, we are talking about a technique that sounds absolutely ridiculous at first glance. We are asking the question, is fishing backward against the strong current the most ridiculously effective trick you have never tried? I promise you, by the end of this video, you are going to discover a completely unexpected truth about how fish behave in moving water and why fighting the current is the biggest mistake you can make. It is going to break every rule you know, but it will explain exactly why your cooler has been empty on those heavy river days. Let me ask you right now, and be honest in the comments. Do you always cast downstream when you fish a river? Let us find out why that might be ruining your chances. This topic is incredibly important because river fishing is all about reading the water, and most of us have been taught to read it the exact same way for generations. We are conditioned to think that working with the water means casting with the flow. It is a belief passed down from old fishing magazines, weekend trips with our dads, and just the basic human instinct to follow the path of least resistance. We stand at the top of a run, chuck our bait down into the abyss, and wait. People do this same routine for years, decades even, suffering through snagged lines, weird line tension, and countless missed bites, just assuming that river fishing is supposed to be tough. We get so locked into this one specific way of doing things that we completely blind ourselves to the actual physics of the river. We forget to ask if there is a smarter way to present our bait to a creature that lives its entire life battling that exact same current. Picture this for a second. You are standing on the bank of your favorite river early in the morning. The fog is just starting to lift off the water, and the current is rushing by with that deep, heavy sound that gets your heart pumping. Every single instinct in your body, and everything you have ever been taught since you were a kid holding your first rod, tells you to cast your bait downstream. You want to let the water take it, right? It feels natural to let your lure or bait flow with the river, drifting away from you into the unknown. But what if I told you that this exact instinct is exactly why you are going home empty-handed on the days when the current is ripping hard? When you throw downstream, you are actually giving up all your control to the water. Your line gets tight in all the wrong ways, your bait lifts off the bottom, and you end up dragging your presentation right over the heads of the biggest fish without them ever taking a second look. The water is simply moving too fast, and your gear is fighting a losing battle against the sheer force of nature. It is a beautiful morning. You are doing everything by the book, but the fish are just laughing at you. This is the exact moment when you need to stop, take a breath, and completely reverse your entire game plan. Let us take a step back and think about what is actually happening beneath that rushing surface. Imagine you are a big, lazy, hungry fish trying to survive in a heavy current. You are not going to sit out in the middle of the fastest water, burning all your energy just to stay in one place. No, you are going to find a nice quiet pocket behind a rock, a sunken log, or a drop-off. You are going to point your nose directly into the current, and you are going to wait for the river to bring the food right to your front door. Now, think about what happens when you, the fisherman, cast downstream. Your bait comes rushing up from behind the fish, or it swings unnaturally across their field of vision at the speed of light. Fish do not have eyes in the back of their heads, and they definitely do not want to chase something that looks like it has a jet engine attached to it. When you fish backward, casting directly against the flow and working your bait downstream toward you, you are finally presenting your offering exactly how the fish expects to see it. It tumbles along the bottom, moving at the natural speed of the current, rolling right past their nose. It is the difference between throwing a cheeseburger past a guy on a speeding motorcycle and setting it nicely on his dining room table. Which one do you think he is going to eat? Have you ever been out on the water, having a conversation with another angler, and you both complain about how the fish are just completely shut down today? You look at your rod tip, bouncing erratically in the heavy water, and you just assume the conditions are terrible. But the truth is, the conditions are fine. Your presentation is just entirely wrong. When you cast downstream into a strong current, the water pushes against the belly of your line. This creates a massive amount of drag. No matter how much weight you put on your rig, that heavy water is going to catch your line like a sail on a boat and lift your bait completely off the bottom. You think you are fishing deep, but your bait is actually suspended halfway up the water column, spinning around like a helicopter blade. No self-respecting fish is going to touch that. By turning around and fishing backward against the current, you eliminate that horrible line drag. You cast upstream, let the bait sink naturally, and reel in just fast enough to keep up with the flow. Suddenly, your bait is ticking the rocks, bouncing perfectly along the bottom where the big fish are actually hiding. It is a massive realization when you finally feel that subtle tap on the bottom, knowing your bait is actually doing exactly what you want it to do, instead of just floating aimlessly in the rush. So what does fishing backward actually look like when you are standing there in your waders? It feels incredibly strange the first time you do it. You walk down to the riverbank, but instead of looking down the river, where the water is going, you physically turn your body and face upstream, looking at where the water is coming from. You take your rod, you make a solid cast directly into the teeth of that rushing current, and immediately, everything feels different. Your line comes rushing back toward you. If you are not paying attention, you will end up with a massive pile of slack line floating on the surface, and that is exactly what scares most people away from this technique. But the trick is to engage your reel the second your bait hits the water. You have to reel just fast enough to keep a slight tension on the line, but not so fast that you pull the bait away from the natural flow of the river. It is a delicate dance, a game of feeling the water rather than fighting it. You are letting the current do the heavy lifting, pushing your bait along the bottom, while your only job is to manage the slack. When you get it right, you will feel every single pebble, every rock, and every subtle change in the riverbed. It is like turning on the lights in a dark room. You finally know exactly where your bait is at all times. There is an old myth in the fishing world that you always need a perfectly drag-free drift to catch fish in moving water. Guys will spend hundreds of dollars on fancy floating lines and incredibly long rods just to mend their line and try to achieve this impossible dream of a perfect downstream drift. But let us be brutally honest here. In a truly strong, heavy current, a perfectly drag-free downstream drift is almost impossible to maintain for more than a few seconds. The water is too chaotic. There are too many cross currents, and your line is eventually going to drag. By fishing backward against the current, we completely throw that old myth out the window. We are not trying to avoid drag, we are actually using the direction of the current to our absolute advantage. Because we are casting upstream and bringing the bait down, the current is naturally pressing the bait down toward the bottom rather than lifting it up toward the surface. We are working with the physics of the river, rather than constantly trying to outsmart them with complicated line mends. It breaks every rule your grandpa probably taught you about fishing moving water. But once you see how effectively it puts your bait right into the strike zone, you will wonder why you ever bothered fighting the water in the first place. The fish do not care about the rules. They just care about what looks like an easy meal. Think about the structure of a wild river for a minute. When you have a massive volume of water rushing down a channel, it does not move in a straight uniform line. It hits boulders, it crashes into fallen trees, and it carves out deep trenches in the gravel. Every time that strong current hits an obstacle, it creates a pocket of softer water right behind it. These pockets are the holy grail of river fishing. They are the safe havens where the absolute monsters hang out, waiting to ambush anything that washes over the obstacle. If you are standing upstream and casting down into these pockets, your bait is going to get swept over the obstacle and instantly dragged out of the soft water by the tension of your line. You might be in the strike zone for half a second before your bait is pulled away unnaturally. But when you are fishing backward, casting up into the current and letting it wash down toward you, your bait acts completely differently. It tumbles naturally over the rock, and then it drops straight down into that soft pocket, just like a stunned baitfish or a helpless bug. Because you are retrieving in the same direction the water is moving, your line does not pull the bait out of the pocket. It stays in the danger zone 10 times longer, giving that hiding predator plenty of time to make a decision and strike. Let us talk about one of the most frustrating things about fishing in heavy water, and that is the dreaded slack line. If you are standing there on a foggy morning, casting a heavy lure straight across or downstream, you probably notice a huge bow forming in your line. You have to reel like crazy just to feel your bait, and by the time you do, your lure is already pinned against the near bank, totally out of the proper fishing zone. This happens because the current is moving faster than your lure can sink. Now flip the script. You cast backward, straight upstream into the oncoming water. Yes, the water is rushing toward you, which means you have to be quick on the reel handle. But here is the secret magic of this trick. Because the water is pushing your bait straight down the same path as your line, that massive, frustrating sideways bow completely disappears. You have a straight, direct connection from the tip of your rod all the way down to your hook. You are no longer guessing where your bait is. You know exactly where it is. You can feel the moment it hits the bottom. You can feel it slide over a slippery rock. And most importantly, you can feel the absolute split second a fish inhales it. That direct line of contact is the single most important factor in catching fish in fast water. And fishing backward is the easiest way to guarantee you always have it. Feeling a bite in a ripping current is notoriously difficult. A lot of guys will stand on the bank for hours, reeling in naked hooks and stolen bait, swearing that they never felt a single tap. When you are fishing the traditional downstream way, a fish often grabs your bait and just sits there holding it in the current. Because your line is already bowed and under tension from the rushing water, you cannot tell the difference between a fish taking the bait and a small piece of weeds catching on your line. The rod tip just bends a little more, and by the time you realize what is happening, the fish has felt the tension, spit the hook, and vanished. Fishing backward against the current completely changes the mechanics of the bite. Because you are casting upstream and bringing the bait down with the flow, when a fish grabs it, they almost always turn their head to go back to their hiding spot. This means they are turning away from you, swimming against the slight tension you are keeping on the line. Instead of a vague, mushy feeling, a bite on the backward cast feels like a solid, unmistakable thump. The rod tip violently dips, and there is absolutely zero doubt about what just happened. The fish essentially hooks itself against the weight of your rod, taking all the guesswork out of the equation and turning those subtle misses into solid hookups. Imagine arriving at your local river spot just as the sun is starting to peek over the trees. It is quiet, the birds are waking up, and you can see nervous water swirling near a big log jam on the opposite bank. It looks incredibly fishy. Another fisherman is already there, standing 100 yards above the log jam, chucking large spinners downstream and reeling them back against the heavy flow. You sit on a bucket, pour a cup of hot coffee, and just watch him for 20 minutes. He makes perfect casts. His gear looks expensive, but he is doing the exact same thing everyone else does. He throws down, the current catches his lure, drags it wildly across the surface, and he reels it back, fighting a massive amount of water resistance. He is getting completely skunked. You finish your coffee, grab your rod, and walk down to the water, but instead of going above the log jam like he did, you walk below it. You face upstream, looking right at the logs and the heavy current rushing through them. You pitch your bait right to the top of the fast water and let the current sweep it naturally right into the face of the log jam. Within 10 seconds, your rod is bent double, your drag is screaming, and the guy upstream is staring at you like you just performed dark magic. You just proved that the angle of your attack is far more important than the lure you are using. To make this ridiculously effective trick work, you cannot just use the exact same setup you use for fishing a quiet pond or casting downstream. You have to completely rethink your weight distribution. When you cast downstream, you usually need a ton of lead just to keep your bait from flying to the surface. But when you are fishing backward, casting against the flow, using too much weight is a guaranteed recipe for getting snagged on the bottom every single cast. Because the current is pushing the bait down to the riverbed naturally, you actually need far less weight than you think. You want just enough weight to allow your bait to tick the bottom occasionally, not drag like an anchor. This is called the backward bounce. You want your setup to tap a rock, lift slightly in the current, float a few feet, and tap again. It requires some trial and error. You might start with a 1/4 ounce, realize it is sticking to the bottom too much, and drop down to 1/8 of an ounce. It feels incredibly weird to use lighter weights in heavier currents, But that is the absolute beauty of this technique. Lighter weight means a much more natural presentation. Your bait flutters and dances through the water column, exactly like a stunned minnow or a dislodged crawfish, making it absolutely irresistible to any predator waiting in the current. Let us be honest, fishermen are stubborn creatures. We are creatures of habit, and we have very fragile egos when we are out on the water. If you start walking down the bank, facing the opposite direction of everyone else, pitching your bait right into the rushing water while walking upstream, you are going to get some strange looks. The old-timers sitting on their coolers are going to shake their heads and mumble about how the new generation does not know how to fish. I have had guys walk right up to me and tell me I am doing it all wrong, that the fish are pointing upstream and my bait is sneaking up on them from behind. But they are missing the fundamental physics of the river. Yes, the fish are pointing upstream, which is exactly why casting upstream and bringing the bait down to them works so beautifully. The bait is coming right down the pipe, right into their field of vision, moving at the exact speed of the natural debris in the water. So when you decide to try this trick, you have to leave your ego in the truck. You have to be willing to look a little foolish for the first 30 minutes while you figure out the retrieve speed and the weight of your rig. But trust me, all those strange looks and mumbled comments will instantly stop the second you pull a massive, angry fish out of the very same run they just fished for 2 hours without a bite. To truly understand why fishing backward is the ultimate cheat code, you have to get inside the mind of an ambush predator. Think about a big brown trout, a smallmouth bass, or a massive walleye holding in a heavy river. These fish are supreme energy conservators. They do not swim around looking for food in heavy water. They sit perfectly still in an eddy or behind a boulder and let the conveyor belt of the river bring the food to them. Their eyes are locked on the water rushing directly toward their face. They only have a split second to decide if a passing object is a piece of wood, a floating leaf, or a tasty meal. When you drag a lure upstream against the current from behind them, it not only looks completely unnatural, but it stays in their strike zone too long, allowing them to inspect it and realize it is a fake. When you fish backward and cast upstream, your bait comes tumbling down the conveyor belt perfectly. It sweeps into their vision from the front, moving quickly with the current. The fish does not have time to inspect it. They do not have time to think about it. Their pure predatory instinct takes over, and they strike out of pure reflex. You are triggering a reaction bite rather than a feeding bite. And in highly pressured rivers, where fish have seen every lure in the catalog, forcing a reaction bite is the absolute best way to bend your rod. Now, I would be lying to you if I said fishing backward was entirely without its challenges. The biggest complaint you will hear from anyone trying this for the first time is that they lose a lot of gear. When you are casting upstream and rolling a bait along the rocky bottom, the chances of getting your hook wedged in a crevice or hung up on a submerged tree root do go up significantly. It is just the nature of the beast. But there is a very specific way to handle this, and it separates the beginners from the guys who truly master the backward bounce. When you feel your line stop, your first instinct is usually to rip the rod back and set the hook as hard as you can. If it turns out to be a rock, you have just driven your hook deep into the stone and you are going to lose that rig. Instead, when you are fishing this technique, you have to learn the subtle lift. When the bait stops, gently lift the rod tip. Do not snap it, just apply smooth pressure. A fish will head shake or pull back. A rock will just sit there. If it is a rock, because you are pulling against the current, you can often just drop your rod tip, let a little slack out, and the force of the rushing water will actually blow your bait right back out of the snag. It is a brilliant little trick that saves you a fortune in lost tackle. One of the hardest things to master when you first start fishing backward against a strong current is finding the perfect reeling speed. It feels like patting your head and rubbing your stomach at the same time. If you reel too slowly, your bait sinks like a stone, the current blows your line past the bait, and you end up with a tangled mess on the bottom. If you reel too fast, you pull the bait right out of the strike zone, skipping it across the top of the waves like a poorly skipped stone. The absolute sweet spot is what I call matching the hatch of the water speed. You want to reel your handle just fast enough to pick up the slack line that the current is pushing toward you, but absolutely no faster. Your rod tip should be pointing up at a 45-degree angle, and you should feel a constant, rhythmic ticking as the bait dances over the stones. The best way to practice this is to find a shallow, clear run in the river where you can actually see your bait working. Make a short cast directly upstream and watch how the bait reacts to your reeling speed. You will quickly see that sometimes you barely need to turn the handle at all. The river is doing all the work, sweeping the bait down toward you, while you are just the conductor of the orchestra, keeping the line tight enough to feel the magic happen. Let us picture another very specific scenario where this trick shines brighter than any other technique. You are wading up a river and you come across a massive, car-sized boulder sitting right in the middle of a screaming rapid. Behind that boulder is a gorgeous, dark, swirling pool of slack water. It just screams big fish. If you stand upstream of that boulder and cast down into the pool, your line gets caught in the fast water on either side of the rock. Within 3 seconds, the current catches your line, yanks your bait right out of the deep pool, and drags it violently through the rapids. The fish down in the deep hole never even had a chance to see it. Now, approach that exact same boulder from downstream. You wade up from below, you stand in the tail out of the pool, and you cast your bait straight past the boulder into the fast water above it. You let the bait sink, and the current washes it naturally right over the lip of the hole and drops it straight down into the abyss. Because your line is coming straight back to you, there is no cross-current to drag it away. Your bait flutter gracefully into the darkest depths of the pool, right onto the nose of the biggest, meanest fish in the river system. This simple change of positioning turns an impossible piece of water into a guaranteed fish-catching machine, all because you decided to fish backward. We need to address why this method was not popular 40 or 50 years ago, and why so many old-school books and magazines tell you to never do this. Back in the day, the gear was completely different. Fishermen were using thick, stretchy monofilament lines, incredibly heavy fiberglass rods, and reels with gear ratios that were painfully slow. If you cast upstream with a heavy fiberglass rod and a slow reel in a roaring current, you simply could not turn the handle fast enough to pick up the slack line. The current would beat you every single time, so they had to cast downstream and let the water create the tension for them. It was a compromise based on the limitations of their technology. But today, we live in a completely different world. We have high-speed bait casting and spinning reels that pull in 40 inches of line with a single turn of the handle. We have super-thin, ultra-sensitive braided lines with zero stretch and incredibly light carbon fiber rods that let you feel a fish breathe on your bait. We no longer have to compromise with the river. Our modern gear is specifically built to handle the incredible speeds required to fish against the current. When you insist on fishing traditional downstream methods with modern high-tech gear, you are essentially driving a sports car in first gear. You are not using the tools to their full potential. There is a massive unspoken stealth advantage to fishing backward that almost nobody talks about. Fish in moving water are incredibly sensitive to sound, vibration, and mud being kicked up from the bottom. When you wade down a river from top to bottom, moving with the flow of the water, every single rock you kick, every clump of mud you step on, and every wave you create gets washed downstream right over the fish you are trying to catch. You are essentially sending an alarm signal ahead of you, announcing your arrival to every fish in the system long before you ever make a cast. By the time your bait hits the water, the fish are already spooked, locked down, and refusing to eat. When you fish backward, you are forced to walk upstream. You are moving against the flow. This means that all the noise you make, all the mud you stir up with your boots, gets washed behind you into the water you have already fished. You are constantly stepping into fresh, clean, undisturbed water. The fish ahead of you have no idea you are coming. They are relaxed, they are in a feeding mood, and they are completely off guard when your bait comes tumbling naturally down the current. It is like being a silent assassin in the river, and it is a massive reason why guys who wade upstream always seem to catch more and bigger fish. Reading the water is a skill that takes years to master, but fishing backward actually makes it significantly easier. When you look at a river, you will see foam lines, bubble trails, and seams where fast water meets slow water. These are the conveyor belts that carry floating insects, injured baitfish, and worms right into the waiting mouths of hungry predators. When you stand upstream and look down at these seams, it can be very deceptive. The water pulls and twists, and it is very hard to judge exactly where your bait will end up once it sinks. But when you are standing downstream looking up, the entire river lays itself out like a beautifully drawn map. You can see exactly where the bubble trail starts. You can see exactly how it funnels down the run, and you can aim your cast precisely to the top of the funnel. You are looking down the barrel of the gun, instead of standing at the target. You can cast your bait right into the absolute center of the foam line, knowing with absolute certainty that the current is going to deliver your bait exactly where it needs to go. This perspective shift changes how your brain processes the flow of the river, allowing you to pick apart small pockets and tiny seams that you would have completely ignored if you were just wildly chucking your bait down the river. Let us dive a little deeper into the actual mechanics of the hook set, because this is where a lot of hearts get broken on the river. When you cast downstream and a fish bites, they are usually facing upstream toward you. When you pull back to set the hook, you are literally pulling the bait out of their mouth. You are dragging the hook forward, often grazing their teeth, or just popping right out of their lips before it has a chance to grab any meat. It is incredibly frustrating to feel a huge thump, set the hook, and come back with absolutely nothing. Now think about the physics of fishing backward. You cast upstream, the bait comes down. A fish, facing upstream, grabs the bait. You are standing below the fish. When you rear back and set the hook, you are pulling the line downstream, directly into the corner of the fish's mouth. It is anatomically the most secure place to hook a fish. You are pulling the hook back into their jaw, rather than out the front of their face. The hook-up ratio for this method is absolutely insane compared to traditional downstream fishing. You will miss far fewer fish, you will land a much higher percentage of the bites you get, and the hooks will be buried so deep in the corner of the mouth that you will almost never lose a fish to a random headshake in the fast water. At the end of the day, fishing backward against a strong current is all about fundamentally changing your relationship with the river. For years, you have probably viewed heavy, rushing water as an enemy. It is something you have to fight, something you need heavy weights and tight lines to conquer. You battle the drag, you battle the snags, and you get frustrated when the water does not cooperate with your plans. But the river is always going to win a fight of pure strength. By turning around, facing the flow, and casting upstream, you stop fighting the river and start using it as your greatest ally. You are letting the massive power of the water do the presentation for you. You are working in harmony with the natural physics of the stream, delivering a bait in the most incredibly realistic way possible. It takes patience, it takes a little bit of practice to manage your line speed, and it definitely takes some thick skin to ignore the guys laughing at you from the bank. But the very first time you feel that unmistakable violent thump on a slack line, and you pull a giant, beautiful fish out of a fast water run that everyone else walked right past, you will never look at a river the same way again. The backward trick is not just a gimmick, it is a complete evolution of how we understand moving water. Let us bring it all together. We have completely flipped the script on traditional river fishing today. By turning your back on the old downstream methods and choosing to fish backward against the flow, you eliminate unnatural drag, you stay in the strike zone longer, and you present your bait exactly how an ambush predator expects to see it. The biggest turning point, that real holy cow moment, is when you finally realize that the rushing current is not an obstacle you have to fight with heavy weights, but a natural conveyor belt that will hand-deliver your bait right to the fish if you just let it. This entirely changes your approach from fighting the water to dancing with it. Suddenly, heavy rapids and swirling pools are not frustrating, they are giant opportunities. Thank you so much for watching and hanging out with me today. If this completely changed how you look at the river, make sure you hit that subscribe button and leave a like on the video. It really helps us out. Now, jump down into the comments and tell me, are you brave enough to try this backward trick on your next fishing trip? Or are you going to stick to the old downstream drift? Let us talk about it.